How could a dumb blonde win over two of the most famous dramatic performances in movie history? To discuss this question, I want to look at the Best Actress race from two angles. First, was this really an upset? And second, what were the reasons for Judy's win? So let's start with the first question. Today, of course, most usually consider this one of the biggest upsets in Oscar history. But was this also the point of view in 1950? Let's go back in time to find out. And yes, you will actually find a lot of newspaper articles which stated that the Oscar is Bette's or Gloria's for the taking. But we need to specifically look at the timeline here and when these kinds of articles appeared. After the release of Sunset Boulevard in August 1950, predictions for Gloria Swanson to not only get an Oscar nomination, but the actual win were extremely high, due to her status as a Hollywood legend and the fact that no other performance that year had made the same kind of impact. But of course in October, All About Eve premiered, and suddenly there was a second acclaimed comeback for another Hollywood giant. And predictions for the Oscar changed accordingly to a close race between Gloria Swanson and Bette Davis. In the following weeks, there were many speculations about who would fill the other three slots, but even before the nominations were announced, it was already agreed that no one else had a chance to win over these two.
You had two Academy Awards, 10 nominations, and every one of them for Best Actress, not supporting.
Mm-hmm.
That is incredible. I don't know anybody else.
I was disappointed about a couple of them I didn't get.
Really?
I always wanted to be the first one who got 3.
Ah.
Miss Hepburn beat me.
But then something happened. In order to qualify Born Yesterday for the Academy Awards, Harry Cohn released it at the last possible moment on December 25, 1950. Opening so late and being such a critical hit, Born Yesterday peaked at the exact right moment when Academy members began to think about the nominees and possible winners for the year. And suddenly, the entire perception of the Best Actress category changed. All columnists immediately agreed that a new contender had entered the race. One who, unlike all other actresses that year, actually had it in her to overtake the two presumed frontrunners. Judy Holliday was in it to win. And every article covering the Oscars immediately changed its predictions. What so far was considered a race between two actresses had turned into a competition among 3. This quote from a newspaper article in 1951 basically sums it all up. Miss Swanson may very well nab the honors. As the aging film queen, she gives a striking, if stylized performance. And she will snag the sentimental vote, which is considerable. Many of the Academy voters may plunk down for Miss Davis because of sentiment and because of her sheer artistry. Judy Holliday is pushing the two older stars for contention. She could walk home with the statuette. Of course, there were 2 more nominees, but neither Anne Baxter nor Eleanor Parker were ever seriously considered as possible winners. Even Eleanor Parker herself agreed with this. I can't quite decide who will win it. A few months ago, I thought Gloria Swanson was a cinch. Now I'm not sure. Bette Davis might walk away with it. Or Judy Holliday. It's a toss-up between those 3. The closeness of this race was also visible in the award season leading up to the Oscars. Gloria Swanson won Best Actress in a Drama at the Golden Globes and at the National Board of Review, and Bette Davis won at the New York Film Critics. The runner-up in New York was actually not Gloria Swanson, but Judy Holliday, showing how serious her comedic work was taken by everyone. Judy also won the Golden Globe for Best Actress in a Comedy, and for some reason, she was also nominated for Best Actress in a Drama for the same movie. I have no idea how this happened, but a lot of awards bodies had to sort out some glitches at the beginning. And I don't want to give the Globes too much credit here, because in these days they had zero influence as a pre-Oscar award, but the fact that she got those 2 nods and another one as Best Supporting Actress for Adam's Rib makes it clear just how dominant her presence at the time was. Again, Born Yesterday and Judy Holliday peaked at the exact right moment. The predictions for the Oscars were also shaped by Daily Variety. Between 1947 and 1957, the outlet annually conducted a poll for the major categories among 15 to 20% of all Academy members and published the results before the show. Their predictions almost always correct. In the prior years, they had only missed Loretta Young for Best Actress and Hamlet for Best Picture, two wins that were consequently considered huge upsets. And who did Daily Variety predict for Best Actress of 1950? To be fair, Daily Variety also said that the race was very close, virtually tied, but with a slight favor for Judy nonetheless. And all of this makes one thing very clear. In 1951, this was far from an upset. Her win was, of course, not a sure thing, but it was always a real possibility, just as likely as a win by Bette Davis or Gloria Swanson. If there was an element of surprise, it came from the fact that many believed that sentiment would play a stronger role in the end result, and also because a win by either Bette or Gloria had been talked about for so long, while Judy had entered the race so late and shook things up unexpectedly.
And now, Judy, darling. Judy, I saved her for the last. Here she is, Miss Ethel Barrymore.
Hello, Judy, dear.
Miss Barrymore, may I say that, of course, it was a thrill to win the Academy Award, but the extra thrill of having you accept my award for me was really more than I deserved. It's something I'll never forget, and you'll always have my eternal thanks.
So, having made it clear that Judy's win did not come out of nowhere, but was actually considered highly possible and even predicted by many, this now leads us to the next question. If the race was so close, why did Judy win, and not Bette or Gloria? What were the advantages of each nominee, and what were the disadvantages? What were the factors that pushed Judy over the finish line? And I know all of you expect one answer now.
I was not under contract to Fox. Miss Baxter was. So, as the studios always used to do, they'd send notes around if it was their people and say,
Anne
please,
Baxter, Marilyn
please
Monroe,
vote.
George
Yes,
Sanders.
This is right.
Yeah.
So, I think I lost by some votes that I would not have lost by if Fox hadn't done that.
Yes, our good old friend. And there is vote splitting for everyone. Bette and Anne split the All About Eve vote, Bette and Gloria split the veteran vote, Anne and Eleanor probably also somehow split some votes, and in the end, Judy somehow ended up as the winner. But if you're here for vote splitting discussions, I must disappoint you, because I don't believe in vote splitting. There are 5 nominees, and the one with the most votes wins. And in every race, all 5 contenders will always end up splitting the votes, because the presence of every single nominee affects the entire race. We don't know if people who voted for Anne would have voted for Bette, or that people who voted for Bette would have voted for Gloria if they hadn't been nominated too. We have cases when 2 nominees from one movie lose, and cases when one is the winner. Even a case where 1 out of 3 is the winner. If a majority of voters had felt that Bette gave the best performance, she would have won. But in the end, the majority was somewhere else, and it always comes down to the circumstances of the race. And what's rather annoying is that all the vote splitting talk pretty much overshadows all other factors that went into this race. All the pros and cons of the 3 frontrunners, and what actually made a win for Judy possible. And these factors are what I want to examine instead. So with this out of the way, let's get back to the initial question. In this close race, what were the advantages of each nominee? And why was it Judy who pulled off the win in the end? First, let's look at Bette and Gloria. Both obviously had the advantages of their comebacks, the legends who returned to former glory. Or as most newspapers called it, sentiment. But in a very competitive field, sentiment can often only get you so far, especially if it differs so strongly as in these 2 cases. The comeback of Bette was highly appreciated because people had witnessed her downfall over the last few years and were extremely happy to see her overcome all obstacles to return to the top, and also the kinds of exciting roles that she had played so often in the past. If you see an Oscar not only as a sign of congratulation, but also as an investment, Bette had the edge over Gloria Swanson, whose comeback was maybe also much applauded, but there was no clear idea about what kinds of projects she could do moving forward.
And after Sunset Boulevard, no one was asking me to make another picture.
There was no idea what a Gloria Swanson role actually was, and if an Oscar for her would have any effect on her career. As one article stated, "Hollywood is a sentimental town. It makes such a good human interest story for Gloria, the forgotten glamour queen of the silent era, to win our greatest tribute. I can almost hear the thunder of applause as Gloria walks off the stage, clutching her golden Oscar. I also predict she will have as many problems getting another good movie as Oscar winners Louise Reiner and Olivia de Havilland." Another advantage for Bette was the fact that All About Eve was certainly more popular with Academy members, winning 6 awards overall, including Best Picture. Of course, the impact of Sunset Boulevard cannot be completely denied. Its darker look at the world of Hollywood was maybe not completely new, but still fitted right into the time and gave the genre a new push, as other movies also moved away from the superficial glitter of Tinseltown, like The Bad and the Beautiful, The Barefoot Contessa, or In a Lonely Place. However, none of these movies were actually nominated for a Best Picture Oscar, and of course, Sunset Boulevard also triumphed in only 3 categories overall, making it clear that the Academy might tolerate this revealing genre, but also didn't want to embrace it too eagerly. All About Eve was a witty look at the backstage world of New York theater, where an aging actress accepted a new reality and moved on. Sunset Boulevard was a biting commentary on Hollywood's dark culture, with a disillusioned queen from yesteryear, unwilling to let go and driven to murder by Hollywood's disinterest. It's easy to imagine which character Academy members favored more.
When you're nominated for an Academy Award, and after you've won a couple, are you still keen on winning a third and a fourth?
Oh,
and
yes,
a fifth?
it's a very great honor.
However, it's also important to point out that while some factors were more strongly in favor of Bette Davis, Gloria Swanson was obviously not out of the running, and also had various advantages in her corner. Yes, her Norma Desmond might not have been entirely appealing to everyone, but this doesn't take away from the attention her comeback and her performance nonetheless received. Her future in Hollywood might have been uncertain, but her past still made an undeniable impression. As I have talked about in my video about Gloria, not everyone was familiar with her body of work during the silent era, but there was still no denying that she was one of the greatest stars Hollywood had ever seen, and awarding her with an Oscar would be a perfect chance to crown a true giant of the screen, who suddenly made an unexpected and highly acclaimed return. But besides Gloria's undeniable past, it's also important to talk about the present of 1950 and 1951. Bette might have had the more celebrated comeback, but she was otherwise very absent during the award season, going to England to shoot Another Man's Poison and focusing on her new marriage without much publicity. Gloria Swanson, on the other hand, was everywhere. And I really do mean everywhere. Between finishing Sunset Boulevard and its release, she was extremely busy on a promotional tour for Paramount's 1949 release The Heiress. Now, Gloria Swanson doing a tour on behalf of a movie she's not in might sound strange at first, but it was not just intended as a publicity tour for The Heiress, but rather a tour on behalf of Hollywood itself. As Gloria remembered, Paramount and all the other studios were pouring money and effort into counteracting the bad publicity caused by the eruptions of scandals in the early months of 1950. The first of these was the nationwide uproar created by Oscar-winning Ingrid Bergman's giving birth to an illegitimate child. The second source of fearful scandal was Senator Joseph McCarthy, who announced in Washington that he had lists of communists all over America. Hollywood was trembling. And so, Gloria Swanson became an ambassador for the movie industry across the United States, visiting more than 30 cities in a couple of weeks. She shook hands, visited hospitals and orphanages, spoke on radio stations and on TV, and attended countless parties and receptions. For Paramount, it was a win-win situation. publicity for the heiress, publicity for the studio, and publicity for the upcoming Sunset Boulevard. For Gloria, it was more publicity than she had in years. By the time I finished the tour, I was famous all over America again. And in early 1950, Paramount sent Gloria on a second campaign tour, this time to promote Sunset Boulevard, and she was consequently again covered in countless outlets all over America, which talked about her career, her comeback, and her performance. Gloria was extremely admired for her never-ending dedication and for talking to as many people as she could from dusk till dawn. So yes, as just said, she truly was everywhere and showed a lot of sportsmanship, a far cry from the woman portrayed in Sunset Boulevard.
And remember, darling, I don't work before 10 in the morning and never after 4:30 in the afternoon.
It was the kind of publicity you could not buy. And then of course, she was also appearing in 20th Century on Broadway with Best Actor favorite José Ferrer during the time of Oscar voting. Her performance in the play brought Gloria another round of overwhelming acclaim, proving her versatility and talents. So looking at the situation, it feels that Bette's performance and comeback narrative might have made a slightly bigger impression, and she also benefited from a more liked movie within the Academy, while Gloria had far more publicity and more sentiment due to her status as one of the biggest stars of Hollywood's silent era. In many articles, this led to a kind of should win Bette Davis, will win Gloria Swanson kind of tonality in the early predictions. Gloria herself later remembered, word was out that it would be a very close contest between Bette Davis, star of All About Eve, and me, and one critic after another announced that I was the favorite. Still, if the race had only been between Bette and Gloria, I personally feel that Bette would have had the edge, simply because she was more familiar in Hollywood circles and had a more appealing character. There was also a lot more talk in the press about Bette deserving to win a third Oscar than Gloria deserving a first one. As Gloria's Sunset Boulevard co-star Heather Hopper said, "If Margot Channing doesn't get Bette a third Academy Award, I'll miss my gas." In the end, it's easy to understand anyone at the time who felt that the Oscar was Gloria's for the taking, but also anyone who felt that Bette couldn't lose. Of course, that is, until Born Yesterday opened and changed everything. So it's time to look at Judy's presence in this Oscar race and what helped her to ultimately triumph in the end. First of all, when discussing this lineup, we mainly talk about Gloria and Bette not only because of their performances, but also because All About Eve and Sunset Boulevard are two of the biggest classics in Hollywood history. And while Born Yesterday was not considered to be on the same level artistically, the general opinion in 1950 was that it certainly came very close. Today, it might be regarded as just a little comedy, a Judy Holliday vehicle, but Born Yesterday was one of the biggest Broadway hits of its time, and the movie version a very prestigious project which also got nominations for picture, director and screenplay. And it was also a bigger moneymaker than either Sunset Boulevard or All About Eve. Awarding it with a major Oscar was in no way seen as controversial at the time, and if you want to recognize the movie's appeal and success somewhere, Judy's performance is the logical place to do so because A, she was the reason for this appeal and success, and B, there were many other opportunities to award either All About Eve or Sunset Boulevard. What of course also helped in this aspect, as mentioned before, Born Yesterday opened very late in the year. The enthusiasm about the movie was very high when Oscar voters filled out their ballots, making Gloria Swanson's comment to Judy, "Why couldn't you have waited until next year to win?" after she lost the Oscar very easy to understand. If Born Yesterday had opened a few weeks later, Judy wouldn't have been in this race, and maybe Gloria would have taken the Oscar instead. But Judy arrived at the last minute and had all the momentum on her side. Another advantage for her. Furthermore, as I have mentioned in many other videos so far, the 1950s and 1960s were a time when Broadway and Hollywood came closer together than ever before. Not only Katharine Hepburn had seen Judy on the stage in Born Yesterday. The play was one of the hottest tickets for basically every member of the Hollywood community for years. All of them applauding Judy's work and now expressing their joy that she created Billy on the big screen as well. In the past, actors recreating or not recreating stage roles had rarely ever been a huge issue. Except for example in the case of Bette Davis, Tallulah Bankhead and the Little Foxes, but would become a hotly debated topic moving forward. And the closeness of Hollywood and Broadway would lead to many awards for actors recreating stage hits in the future. And all these debates began with the 1950 Academy Awards, when José Ferrer and Josephine Hall took home Oscars as well. It was a new trend which highly benefited Judy, who was right at its center. I have also talked about the Oscars as an investment. And when we look at the race from this point of view, then Judy Holliday is also the most logical choice. Bette Davis and Gloria Swanson were maybe giants of Hollywood, but they also were the past. Judy was the future. In a race of newcomer versus veteran, sometimes the veteran triumphs, a Geraldine Page or a Jessica Tandy. But in most cases, Oscar voters give their blessings to the newcomer, the one who will be a big star and hopefully make a lot of money. A Jennifer Lawrence, a Grace Kelly, an Audrey Hepburn, a Gwyneth Paltrow, or a Judy Holliday. And while the hype around Adam's Rib had died down a bit by now, the movie and the praise for Judy's work in it had made it clear that Born Yesterday was not a fluke, and that Judy was here to stay. But beyond this, it's also important to highlight that Born Yesterday not only made a strong financial and critical impact after its release, but that it was a true cultural and societal phenomenon as well. It was the right movie at the right time. As I said earlier, Born Yesterday was criticized by some for its alleged anti-American views, but the vast majority saw it completely differently, fully fledged pro-American, showing how people with strong beliefs in the Western political system can make the country a better place, and emphasizing the virtues of democracy, decency and patriotism at every second. Ironically, the political realities of 1950 and 1951 that caused some protests against Born Yesterday and Judy Holliday were also the reason why they became so popular, as they provided the perfect chance for escape and uplift in a time that desperately longed for it. Born Yesterday might not have had the same level of prestige as All About Eve or Sunset Boulevard, but it had an urgency and timeliness that couldn't be denied. And all of this is also true for the character of Billy Dawn and the star persona of Judy Holliday. The cultural and societal significance of Billy Dawn in 1950 and 1951 might not be obvious at first from today's point of view, but her image at the time actually went far beyond the stereotypical dumb blonde and fit perfectly into the changing environment. The Pygmalion-like development of Billy as a woman fighting for understanding and recognizing her own self-worth in fact perfectly captured the confusion and insecurities about the roles of women during the time after World War II.
I just know I hate my life. There's a better kind, I know it.
Billy was content with traditional gender roles, but she also demonstrated that a soft power like knowledge was stronger than male force, and her newfound wisdom not only made her understand the politics of her country, but also the politics of her relationship, gaining her equality and ultimately the upper hand, but without ever stepping outside of what was considered the female position, maybe finding independence from one man, but still staying within society's expectations by marrying another in the end. And all of this turned Billy into a character that stood for the zeitgeist, that had a contemporary importance, and that, like the movie itself, could be claimed by both progressives and conservatives. And therefore gave Judy Holliday an even stronger prominence in this race, as she played a woman who, unlike her two closest competitors, didn't long for the past, but one who fit perfectly into the present and the future. And Judy's own personality captured this uncertainty and nervousness about roles for women just as much as Billy Dawn. She was not only constantly portrayed as a new kind of Hollywood star, but also a new kind of woman, happily married but still independent, the driving force in her relationship without dominating her husband, quirky and self-assured, establishing a both modern but still traditional female image on and off the screen. It was a personality that emphasized Judy as a perfect fit for the future of Hollywood. And all of this independence and self-assuredness and positioning as a new kind of female star was also constantly covered in connection to Judy's rise to stardom. With her increasing publicity, newspapers again talked about how she was cast in Born Yesterday on the stage, how she took over this role in a few days and made it one of the biggest hits Broadway had ever seen, and how she then overcame all of Harry Cohn's doubts to be cast in the movie version as well, making the movie a big hit and proving Cohn wrong on all accounts about her appropriateness for the screen. Most in Hollywood cheered for Judy, for triumphing over one of the most hated men in the business, and also for not backing down during her contract negotiations, again showing that she was a woman unwilling to settle for anything less than what she asked for. It was a display of strength and determination that brought Judy basically as many admirers as her performance in Born Yesterday.
I think I recognize your voice. Did I once have the pleasure of playing opposite you?
Was it a pleasure?
A real one, yes.
The big elephant in the room are, of course, the accusations in red channels. Because even if they didn't have a big impact on Judy so far, they were still known by many in the industry. And it feels logical to assume that many Academy members would have turned against Judy. And I suppose that some did. But on the other hand, many in the community detested the actions of McCarthy and red channels, and while the atmosphere was too tense and dangerous to speak out publicly against them, the Oscars were an opportunity to show a silent sign of support. Best Actor winner Jose Ferrer had also been named in red channels, and the same year Joseph L. Mankiewicz was caught in a big fight in the Directors Guild with Cecil B. DeMille, who tried to introduce a loyalty oath to the US as a requirement to be allowed to make a movie, a step opposed by Mankiewicz, which would cause Luella Parsons to publicly call him a communist. It was a bitter fight among many top directors, with Mankiewicz and his supporters triumphing in the end. This did of course not stop the witch hunt, but it was a significant success for the director. And of course, all three of them, Judy, Jose and Joseph, would win Oscars that night. I'm not saying that this was an important factor. I suppose Jose Ferrer and Joseph Mankiewicz would have won under any circumstances, but in the tight Best Actress race, a show of support for a victim of baseless accusations could certainly make a difference. And finally, you cannot ignore the biggest advantage in Judy's corner. The simple fact that people actually thought that she deserved to win. All those articles that stated that she was a co-favorite in this race were not a result of campaigning or the perfect release date of Born Yesterday. Instead, she was considered a frontrunner or at least a strong contender because her performance was just that good. So good that even the Academy's usual bias against comedy could not stop her. Unlike Anne Baxter, Eleanor Parker, and all the non-nominees that year, Judy was never seen as inferior to Bette or Gloria, but considered their equal. I mean, Academy members cannot know which performances become iconic and which not, but in 1950 and 1951, there was no reason to assume that Judy's work wouldn't be remembered just as strongly or regarded just as highly.
In 1950, Sunset Boulevard brought a nomination for an Academy Award to Miss Swanson.
It should have gotten the Oscar.
It should have gotten the Oscar. Absolutely should have gotten the Oscar. I saw the other night on television, you remember the movie that you made with, oh dear.
Jack Lemmon?
No, this was back when you went to Washington and...
Paul Douglas?
Paul Douglas, no.
Born Yesterday.
Yeah, Born Yesterday. That's what I saw it the other night, and it was just as good as the first time I ever saw it. There was a lot of fun. You looked as though you had a great deal of fun making that.
That was wonderful fun, yes.
You look like you have a lot of fun doing everything that you do.
As I said earlier, many talked about an Oscar nomination or even the Oscar itself for Judy's performance immediately after the release of Born Yesterday, simply because it was seen as highly deserving. even with this competition. As Luella Parsons wrote, Judy gives the best comedy performance of the year, with no one even close to her. Watch for Judy at Oscar time. With all of this, I don't want to say that Judy's win was inevitable. It was extremely close, and nobody would have been shocked if the winner had been Bette or Gloria. But again, a win for Judy was always just as likely. It was a nail-biter between those three, and in the end, one of them had to win. And for me, it was important to point out that today's perception of this race mostly misses the bigger picture. No, this was not a stunning upset. And no, this win did not come out of nowhere. Yes, Bette and Gloria had many reasons to expect to win, but as I have discussed, Judy had a large share of advantages too. Many different circumstances influence an Oscar race, and if these circumstances had been any different, maybe there would have also been a different outcome. The Oscars are always a snapshot of that moment in time. And in that moment, Judy simply had the upper hand. So there is much more to this race than the constant talk of vote splitting or upset. Instead, from the moment Born Yesterday opened, Judy was a legitimate contender for the gold, even against this legendary competition, and a lot of what is said about this race today is simply shaped by a modern perspective, without the context of the time and the circumstances surrounding each nominee. And I hope I could make that clear.